I can't. I've been through this a number of times. Sometimes I've written the plan myself. Other times worked with a consultant, and just Becky's work and working with MSA overall has went really well. And just want to share a appreciation for her work on the project to get us to this point and to stay on schedule, because not sure how familiar everyone is with working with consultants, but sometimes that's part of the battle, is to just stay on schedule and avoid large delays for a variety of reasons. So,
well, I would concur on behalf of myself, and I'm sure the whole committee. Becky, thank you. It's been wonderful going through this process and watching. You've been extremely professional, and I think the data you've pulled out and the conclusions you've come to and all what you pulled together is amazing to me. I'm a guy that comes up with ideas and no idea how to get them done. You've done a beautiful job with spearheading this. So kudos to you from us. Thank you.
Thank you guys. You guys have been a great group to work with. I appreciate all the input. I know it's a lot to tour and think about every single park, so I really do appreciate your time. That being said, tonight is hopefully our last look at this before it goes to Plan Commission and Council. So what I wanted to do was just run through kind of an overview presentation. We will spend a little more time on the fees again, because we did get some feedback from planning staff. So we'll spend a little more time on that, but otherwise I just kind of wanted to run through all the high points of the plan. And I'm going to share my screen.
That was good. Somebody likes a plan.
Very enthusiastic. Good. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? Is it up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So first, just kind of big picture idea. So this plan, like you guys all know, it's our 5-year plan to guide budget and capital improvement projects for the city, for parkland acquisition, bicycle route, trail development, and improvements to existing parks. And this plan is often a requirement for getting federal and state recreational funding, usually our stewardship funding. So this is indeed a good plan to have in place. So the plan content, you guys have hopefully had a little time to look through the entire thing. These are the main sections of the plan. For our 3 times we've met before this, we've focused on primarily, so we've looked at the goals and strategies, our analysis of needs and demands, and our recommendations and implementations really are our last 4 chapters, which are the meat of the plan. Now I'm just going to go through a few highlights. So this is our final recommendation for new parks, new trails, improvements to existing trails, and trail connection. This was based on our needs analysis where there were gaps for existing park service. Just a couple of areas to call out, like area B, area C up here. Those were areas that were probably the most underserved. And then these were also recommendations from you guys, from the public meeting, just locations that we've identified when we were looking at the city as a whole, where it might be a good idea to put a park and also a trail. So our needs assessment really boiled down to this one table, which we are at a standard of 15 acres per 1,000 residents. So currently the city has a deficit of about 5 acres to meet that standard. If we look out to the next 20 years to 2030, that means the city needs to acquire an additional 44 acres of parkland to maintain that 15 acre standard. And that's what this is what we used for our fee calculation in the end. You'll hear me bring up this number again, the 15 acres per 1,000. So these are just the high priority recommendations. So we got this, you guys ranked the recommendations. We already went through these. Matt ranked the recommendations, and this is where the scoring kind of landed. These are our high priority improvements. If we add them up, it's about 2.7 million plus improvements. dream. The dream is to do these all within the next 1 to 3 years, maybe not realistic, but that's the goal. I just wanted to highlight a few of the recommendations that were over 100,000. These are our bigger improvements. So the installation of restrooms at Middleton Hills Park North, that one we talked about a little bit about the last meeting, still a high priority for the group. We talked about moving that down. Parisi Park is also another big one. So creating a master plan and then implementing that master plan, which I think this marries nicely with the Pheasant Trail Branch Trail corridor that's being worked on right now. And just, it seems like a really great opportunity for a big park area to focus on in the community. Firefighter Memorial Park, that's also something that's currently being worked on. So providing accessible trails there. Orchid Heights Park repaving path, that's currently in the CIP. So that's something that's already slated to happen. And then finally, the Penny Klein Park, which we talked a little bit about last time, looking for a partnership with the school to provide restroom and concession facility, because those are a little more costly and likely going to be used by the school quite a bit. One of the other topics that was a little bit more unique about this corp was, we talked a lot about this last time too, the use agreements that the city has with private organizations sometimes preclude the city from actually using its sports fields. So the 3 major recommendations that we had to try and remedy that and really focus on this from an equity standpoint, so that, you know, the city can use its parks and provide some city programming. Not everyone can afford to be involved in a private sports organization. So the first major recommendation, probably the biggest, is to require sports organizations to provide detailed recommendations and slowly do away with kind of a blanket reservation system. The second one is just continue to charge only hourly rates to organizations, so they're only paying for what they actually use. And then the third one is look at other reservation systems. I know I've talked to Matt a little bit about this. The city has maybe talked about a couple others, but looking at some others that might facilitate the ease of reservations. If there are priority users for parks, there are systems that can prioritize users and block out certain dates for those groups. So just adding a little bit more flexibility there. The second kind of unique aspect of this plan was the meeting the needs for urban infill development. And for this one, we came up with 3 kind of major recommendations to meet that need. So the first is just focusing on converting unused abandoned space after development happens. Maybe there's a larger corner of a lot that could be used for a park. I'm just kind of squeezing them in where we're able to, or even looking at land that's currently vacant and maybe for sale. Working something out so the city can use that as maybe a soccer field until it's actually purchased. Getting creative just with land that is available, because we know that there is not a ton left for parkland within the city. The second option or idea is to create an on-site open space requirement for multifamily developments. So requiring a certain amount of square footage based on the number of people presumed to occupy a development. And that could be also requiring or suggesting certain types of facilities based on who's going to be living in the development. Is it going to be family with children, or is it something that's geared towards seniors, and then you might want a different sort of park and rec facility? And then our third recommendation is focusing on creating high inclusion parks in areas that are going to experience infill development, because these areas don't have a ton of land available. So the idea here is to really focus on existing parks and building those up and maybe rethinking them. Maybe this involves going through a master planning process and not really thinking about just we're going to provide an additional tennis court or just an additional basketball court, but maybe rethinking the space and how are we going to provide places for people to socialize, places for people to play, places for people to eat. So just kind of rethinking the park and rethinking how we can expand options to include more people to use the park. So that's what we're labeling as our kind of high inclusion park area. And the 2 areas in the city that we've identified that are going, with the help from the city, that are going to experience infill development at a higher rate than average are kind of the Parmenter area and the University Ave area. All right, so now the fees. Might need a little feedback on this one, but so we went through this last time. So we recalculated the fee in lieu. You can see the table on the left has what the current fee is. There's a reduced rate for multifamily with 1 bedroom or less, just with the idea that there are going to be less people occupying that unit, so they won't need as much space, as many amenities. We recalculated the fee to be $4,220 per dwelling unit. So like I said, we ran this by city staff, and not surprising, they were, a little concerned about the suggestion of such a steep increase in the fee. But we did note that, our charge was to calculate what the need is for the city, calculate what the cost is going to be, and kind of marry the two together. So we know how much parkland we need. We have a low estimate of the value per parkland. And this is what the number is if you do the calculation. So Abby's suggestion was to go back to that kind of reduced rate for multifamily with 1 bedroom or less, which I think could work. But I just wanted to run that by you guys. So I did the calculation on that. So for our total fee in lieu to meet the needs of the community in the next 10 years, we need about $5 million in land. It's land value. And right now, the city is charging a 60% reduced rate for multifamily with 1 bedroom or less. So I kept that ratio of a 60% of the total fee for 1 bedroom or less, and then the full fee for all other unit types, and ended up with a $4,460 fee for anything other than a multifamily with 1 bedroom or less. And for that, a fee of $2,676. So if you do the math, it still comes out to about $5 million total. It's just multifamily with 1 bedroom or less are paying more, all other less, and multifamily, all other units are paying more. So I wanted to get your feedback on doing that kind of breakout, suggesting that kind of breakout similar to what you have now.
Well, I think it's good. I still advocate that we be right up front with what it actually costs. We're not making the decisions in this plan. We're not saying you can't change this, except this is the number that actually fits what we need. So I appreciate what you've done, and I support what's right there.
Okay. Others?
Others?
It looks good to me.
I agree with that also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so it's still the same total amount. That's still 5 million, just how it's divvied up. Abby's other suggestion was to kind of get creative because the city does want to encourage infill development. So my thought there was we could suggest waiving or reducing the fee in lieu only for infill development when there's not going to be any parkland acquisition. So that would only be a development fee from those.
But again, that's their decision. That's
right.
I don't think we should be personally taking that position and saying, here's a bunch of fees, but we encourage you to change them. Just this is what it costs. This is what it is.
Right. Okay, so don't include that in the final, but just let that be something that council can decide at a later point.
I think that's what they do anyways. That's their job. Right? Other comments, thoughts here?
No, John, I have to laugh, but I think it is important to just be objective about this and not try and make any policy decisions. Right. I think that, unfortunately, this is only going to be good for the next 5 years as well. Is that correct? The assumption is that in 5 years, we're going to have to update these rates for whatever the current market value of land is for whatever is left. So these rates are only going to go up, or the cost of acquiring land is going to go up. I don't know that we should say, we think you should bifurcate the rates a little bit because you've got multifamily or you're doing, workforce housing. That's something that the council should consider, or planning should consider. I think the sentiment is correct that what we should be doing is being objective about this, saying we anticipate $5 million in cost for land cost to maintain, you know, that those parkland to people ratios. This is what it's going to be. If finance wants to look at it, or planning wants to look at it and says we can get here by doing it somehow differently, or we can make adjustments to it because of some prioritized preference towards housing structure, I mean, that's up to them.
Yeah. So you're advocating for not having the multifamily with 1 bedroom or less fee.
No, I just think you should say, you know what, based on what these metrics look, based on the acquisition costs alone, all we're going to do is give you a straight line dwelling unit cost. You want to make policy decisions because you have other calculus that's involved, that's fine, but we need $5 million.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm curious about, both the commission as well as Becky's thoughts are on this idea. Like, the first thing that everyone says is, well, you're not going to be able to buy land anyway. There just isn't a lot of available land, and what the commission's response to that is, because there are some opportunities, but I think we all know they're very limited.
Are you asking what the preference should be as if there's no land available, then really what's going to happen is that the only alternative we would have is to use both fee in lieu and park development for development, which is kind of what we're doing now anyway.
I agree, Mark. I want, because I think that's going to be the question that gets raised by people that are concerned about these fees going up, is you're charging a fee in lieu, but what are you going to do with that money? Because of where are you buying parkland? So I kind of wanted everybody to be on the same page with that answer and response moving forward.
I hear there's land in the town of Middleton that we could buy and move into the city.
Right near the airport, I guess.
Oh, geez, don't say that.
I want to touch that.
You know, I do have a concern about splitting between multifamily with 1 bedroom or less, or larger multi. What happens if you have a split or a mixed use in an apartment complex? If you don't have a flat fee, I think, Mark, you're saying, here's the money we need. What's the fee going to be? But if you split it down, does this not, how would you calculate? It seems to me that it would be problematic to try and tease out a multi-use, a multi-unit with many 1 unit contained within that building or buildings. I mean, do you see that as problematic?
Well, I'll you know, that Becky, how did you get to that mix? You assumed.
So right now, the
There-
mix, the percentage of multifamily with 1 bedroom or less in the city is 18.8%. So I assumed that same mix going forward.
Right. So conceptually, what could happen is that the developers will say, you know what, I'm only going to build 1 bedroom apartments from now on to save on park fees. I don't think that that's the issue. Is then would the park fees and the development fees really be that much of a mover in terms of mix from a development perspective? And I don't think it would be. Right. That's what your concern is that a developer will say, well, you know what, I'm only going to build 1 bedrooms because I don't want to pay the park fees. I don't think it really goes that far down.
Okay.
I mean, has the city had a problem? Have we heard the city's had a problem so far? I mean, the fee's less now, but
Matt's shaking his head no.
yeah, I'm guessing, I mean, developers are probably going to build what the market can bear, and they do their market analyses and whatnot.
Yeah, and they're going to work with the council, whoever, to get their fees down, no matter how they do it, under what restrictions. I still think that the purpose of this document to say, this is the cost, this is what it costs, this is what we need, and here's a projection of how you could do that. It's just a suggestion as to how this breaks down and works out. So I think that personally, I'm still okay with it.
This is the cost. It's hard to fight. It's
$5
just, what do
million.
you do with that?
What, have you had experience with other landlocked cities that are trying to do this? I mean, what have they done in terms of acquiring parkland? Or Matt, maybe if you're landlocked and there's still continued development and land is at a premium, what do other municipalities do?
I mean, we've talked to the city of Fitchburg. Maybe they're not dealing with this to quite the same extent, but we've talked to them a little bit. And I mean, the conversation goes towards focusing on existing parks. The other thing is I did kind of a survey of other communities just across the US, and that's where that recommendation of requiring on-site parkland based on the number of people and demographic of people who are going to be living there. That's something else that some communities have done. So those are kind of the two most viable options that jumped out to me.
All right, other comments? All right, why don't you go ahead, Becky, so we can.
Sure.
Yeah.
So sorry, the consensus is, do we want to take out the consider waiving or reducing fee for low income affordable housing? Is that something remove?
I would say leave it in. I mean, don't have a consideration for low income, but let someone else make that decision. I mean, we're here to say, well, this is the money we need. If they want to take something away, then let them come up with a way of getting the monies to the park commission to make it up. The park funds, I should say.
Okay.
I think the plan commission is also on their plan is, there's still an advocacy for low income, and taking that into account as a way to motivate it is saying we as the Parks Commission, whatever Parks Recreation Committee, are saying that we agree with that sense. And so we're offering some method to look at that, or at least support the sense of encouraging the low income housing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that was kind of the motivation behind that.
Hey,
Okay.
hey, Matt, just a quick question. And so right now, the city's policy is to waive these fees for workforce housing in many cases. Shouldn't we recommend that the city may waive those fees, but it's really, I don't know that the park should accept that. I think, what we really should be saying is that to give you TIF money to build, or even if it's not TIF money, park still wants the money, and whether that becomes a TIF expense or a developer expense, it makes no difference to the parks. If you're going to build something, parks wants X amount of dollars, and whether that comes from the developer or whether that comes from TIF money, parks is indifferent, right? So what I suggest is that we tell planning that we don't accept the fact that they are waiving park fees.
They can waive the park fees as long as the fees somehow in some other fashion get back into the park funds. I mean,
well, and that's my point, is that that's not what's happening, right? So if there's a multifamily development, then what parks really gets shut out.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, Plan Commission isn't making that decision. That's council, isn't it?
Well,
it's all a recommendation. It's ultimately a council that makes that determination.
I don't think anybody's ever thought about it that deeply, right? The reality is that, planning says, hey, why don't we waive park fees because it's multifamily? right? You know, the angst about anything that says public family, I'm sorry, affordable housing, you know, we just say, okay, you know, tell us what you want and we'll give it to you, instead of looking through and saying, well, this is the impact of giving assistance for workforce housing. And the reality is that we hurt ourselves. It's worse, right? It's worse because it's a self-inflicted wound that we're doing here, because we're deliberately shortchanging the park system to make affordable housing work. And to me, it really doesn't make sense that we don't consider, or that we don't continue to fund parks when we're giving subsidies for multifamily or workforce housing.
No.
My reality, and I think the goal of everyone here is that whether it's a workforce housing project or a high-end housing project, that the park's great no matter what. And I think that's what hits on the core of this is, if we're not getting these funds, where are those funds coming from?
And I think we'd have to agree that the workforce housing probably develops a fairly significant parks need, because at the risk of stereotyping, I suspect the low-income housing aren't joining private soccer clubs or you know, private swimming pools and so on and so forth. These are people that will have a need for outdoor recreation. And so to waive that off, I think is a mistake. I think we just need to say, here's how much we need and go from there.
So you're
Great.
concurring with Mark, so I'm grabbing. Jim, you're concurring with Mark, is that what I'm picking up?
Well, that was, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if that's what Mark was
Pretty much,
getting
I
at,
guess.
then absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Other comments? I mean, I'm personally torn between the issue of, do we just demand and say, this is what it needs, here's our number, take it or leave it, which just shows a classic budgetary unawareness or ignorance to other people's needs? Or do we say we've at least thought about these issues, and so we're offering something that may or may not be reasonable, but to the reader of this document says we at least thought about the fact that not everybody can pay the same amount, and so we're presenting an image that we've thought this through.
Well, so let's be realistic. It's not that everybody can pay. It's a developer,
Yeah.
right? So these are, you know, you always tap the people with the deep pockets. The issue really is who's going to pay parks. It's either the city's going to, and so let's step back another couple feet here. Affordable housing doesn't get built without city assistance, right? It just doesn't happen. Nobody is that magnanimous that they're going to build affordable housing in the city of Middleton. So it's going to get built with TIF assistance. And as part of that TIF expense, the city really needs to recognize that it should not be shorting the parks function. And so I think it's what we say here is that this is the money that the parks needs to meet the goals that have been established. And don't get into, you know, saying, well, you know what, we'll consider giving you a discount because you're meeting these specific criteria. We should just let the council or finance and planning or whoever come up with the plan that gets the money to parks, whether it's through the developer fees paid by the developer or whether it's TIF assistance that's going from left pocket to right pocket.
Okay. Other comments? I got, you know.
Well, I agree with that. I think this document should be very objective. And our priority is to have the number of parks that we need per family, per person, and put the cost in the document, the cost that we need to accomplish that goal, and put it in the document. And I don't think it's our position or the document's position to determine the subjectiveness of who's going to use the parks.
This is a tough one. I have to be honest. The two types of plans I primarily do are corps and housing studies. So I talked with a lot of developers and a lot of housing experts, and fees are always something that comes up, and developers always, you know, say the fees are too high. So we did a housing study in Fitchburg. That was one of their big pain points, but I mean, ultimately it is a council decision, a policy decision. It's really tough though, and I know a lot of communities are wrestling with the same issue.
Well, I'm hearing the shift here, and I guess I concur in shifting my own thinking a little towards Mark and the rest of that. We ought to just be blatant and say, this is what it costs. We're not going to make the decision. The council's going to make the decision, whoever, and in deference to Mark, you know, Mark's been around and knows how that's going to work. And I think that, I guess I'm now changing my mind and leaning towards just being overt. And here's the cost. Doesn't matter who's doing it. The developer's going to pay it, and for every acre of land and unit they put in, this is the cost. Other thoughts?
I would agree with you, John.
Yeah, I'm also in agreement.
John, I think if your concern is that you make sure that it's known that we looked at this and thought about this, I think you might want to put a footnote in there and say, if the council or others are looking to support workforce housing, then that could be done, but we'd have to redistribute fees to ensure that the money's needed to get to the park fees, get into the park funds. And if that's through, as Mark said, left hand to right hand through TIF, or is that increasing what we're suggesting here so it's covered by other folks? I don't know that matters a whole lot, but that would be up to whomever's making that decision to make those adjustments.
But I hear what you say, and I think that what I'm hearing is sort of a, you know, you make it clear in the verbiage that we've thought about this, but the numbers are the numbers, and it's just absolutely
Exactly.
Footnote or it's in the pro.
Right.
Just don't ignore that fact. But
yes.
All right. Any other comments? All right, Becky, I think we have pretty close to a consensus there.
All right, we're good. I'll make that footnote then. So the other thing is very similar. So the park development fee, I did the breakdown for multifamily with 1 bedroom or less and all other unit types. I'm assuming if you're fine with the other breakdown, you're fine with this breakdown too. It's the same. It's about 5 million as well. It's just distributed differently.
Looks good to me.
All right, so our draft review. So I did make all the edits. I just kind of listed those out on the slide, the edits from our November 2nd meeting. Matt sent another edit today. There was an error on the boundary for the non-golf course land in those park spreads kind of at the end of the report. So I changed that. Today, I also made an edit to the table comparing staffing levels in Middleton to staffing levels in other Wisconsin communities. So those are all the edits that have been made since the last time we talked. And then I will make this one final edit, the footnote about the park fees.
I didn't understand that table, Becky, that employee table and the percentages of average. That I didn't understand what that was relevant to.
So that was showing, so the average for all of those communities is 7 staffers, and the percentage is, so Middleton had, I think it was like 10 or 11 employees. The average is 7. So Middleton had 150% of the average, which probably doesn't look, I mean, it doesn't really help our cause. So I deleted that column.
Oh,
that's all it was showing is how the cities compared to the average.
Well,
just divide them by 2 and then put a footnote that we divided by 2.
There you
go. I have found over time trying to compare different municipalities that is really, really tough because everybody does things differently. And you find out that there's a lot of park employees that aren't called park employees, but they're public works. And so you get a skewed result when you try to do the comparisons.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And every community has a different standard for parks, a different acreage, different number of trails. So yeah, that column's gone. So next steps, recommendation by planning commission, and then ideally council adoption. After this meeting, probably tomorrow, Matt, I'll catch up with you and we can figure out what those dates are going to be. But that'll be it. Does anyone have any questions or other comments?
Good job. I think we need a motion on this, do we not? Okay. I mean, I would entertain a motion that we accept this report as amended in tonight's meeting.
I'll go ahead and make that motion.
All right, thank you, David. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Nick. Other discussion, commentary? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. We move on to our second item.
John, if I could make a suggestion, I know we've got some folks on the call from Bishop's Bay, and Blake may not be excited about this, but we might want to switch the order of those just because we've got some people waiting for that discussion.
All right, I'm comfortable with that if everybody else is. All right, let's move ahead to item number 4, and we'll come back to item number 3. Request from Bishop's Bay to change the conditions at the park. Why don't you, Matt, why don't you go ahead and comment on this?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm trying to share my screen back here.
Yeah.
I think everyone saw the letter that was in the support material. We have a request from the Homeowners Association. I know a number of those members are on this call regarding concerns of activity, potential illegal activity occurring at Taylor Park. There were a number of requests, a gate, a video surveillance system, increased park signage, lighting, increased police patrols, those sort of things. And we do have a security system, rather robust. It's probably the most secure park that we have in the system. Lakeview is now second place, I would say. When the shelter was put in, we installed a 5-camera system. Sees all sides of the shelter and the entire parking lot. The follow-up and work I've done, the police department has had 0 reports of anything that matches the letter. Doesn't mean that it's not happening. They just haven't had it reported to them. The reports, they've taken 5 calls this year in regards to Taylor Park, and all 5 are related to social distancing concerns. Probably the most 2020 thing I can say. I went through roughly the last month's worth of evening surveillance footage and really didn't see anything. There are some kids playing basketball at dark. Our cleaning crew comes nightly, which that's always good to see that, you know, they're there when they're supposed to be. And the camera, probably the most annoying thing is every vehicle that turns into the apartment complex turns the cameras on. So there's a lot of little blips as a vehicle pulls off of Bishops Bay Parkway and the lights shine down into the parking lot, and that triggers the motion sensor on the camera. So I've encouraged anyone that has a date or a time of an incident to contact me. The police department encourages anyone, not just Bishops Bay, anyone in the community that sees any activity concerning to please contact non-emergency. If people don't feel it warrants a 911 call, it warrants a 911 call, definitely call 911, but the police department's more than willing to take non-emergency concerns and follow up on them by anyone that has. As I mentioned in my memo, there's a park sign currently that faces Highway Q. The old style park signs, I have no problem at your direction this evening. I've got a quote of putting in one of the newer style park signs at the entrance drive that lists the hours of 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. as the rest of the parks. The quote's $1,300. It would match the design of the rest of the signs. I'm fundamentally opposed to any idea of a gate in a public park. And I gave numbers on lighting, and that obviously at this point that needs to be a capital budget discussion and weighed and measured against a lot of other lighting requests that haven't quite risen to that level of priority. But the options I laid out, you're looking somewhere north of 10,000, which would require it to be in the capital improvement plan. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Matt. Questions from the committee?
Have we gotten anything from the neighbors about specific incidents or any description of what was going on, who was in the area, what type of vehicle was driven, etc.?
I think that's a no, Matt, is it?
Yeah, I've not received any of that information.
I mean, I'm also thinking about time of day because, they're talking about, they would like to be able to shut a gate or something like that at 11 o'clock, but it's like, the parks close at 10. How much of this activity is taking place while the park is open? That's another question I would have.
Yeah, my feeling at looking at this is that the lack of any data, the thing of what's actually going on and when, that we do have security cameras, we do have a police force that's now doing more observation than before. I certainly could advocate the committee getting the sign up and, so that we're in sync with the other parks, et cetera, like that. But the cost of lighting, I think that, I'm not saying this isn't happening, but we've just not seen any data to talk about where and how it's happening. So I think we ought to be vigilant, but not necessarily jump into action until we have better and more data.
I would agree, John. I think that, the new sign is certainly within reason to get in sync.
Why don't you make a motion, Aaron?
Motion to,
Fine.
okay, now I can make a motion to get the sign updated to be in sync with all the other parks, but I think just what John said, everything else, let's just be diligent, and when it warrants, escalating to any other motions, then we can consider that at that time.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second on the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, David. Second. Discussion on the motion about the sign. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. I think, the issue of the lighting and the capital budget is something we can certainly pay attention to and be aware of. But again, I think at this point that's, I understand the concerns from the community, but given zero data on what's going on, I don't think personally I'm ready to jump and rearrange our budget to accommodate something until we have a better sense of what it is we need to accomplish.
And how would we go about taking care of that? I mean, is lighting the way to solve it? Is a gate or something else the way to solve it? Let's just try to find out what we're fighting before we figure out what weapons to use.
Okay. Other comments?
Hi, this is Alex Ryan with the community of Bishops Bay. I appreciate the gesture on the sign. I think that's a good measure, and I think your comments on more data is fair. If we can get more data, we'll come back to you and see what can be done at that point if it merits some further action and what that action might be.
All right, thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. That's what we want. We don't want to not act, but we need to know what we're acting about, I think. So
absolutely.
that
Appreciate it.
We definitely move ahead with the sign, at least as a starting point, And I think we'll continue to look at the cameras and get the police to continue their vigilance on this thing. All right, any other comments or questions?
Just one thing to share, and this is more of a PSA and not directly tied to this topic. The security cameras that we've been installing that are at Bishop's Bay and are at Lakeview, the PD has access. They're on their systems, so officers can pull those up in their dash. Forgive me, I forget what their consoles are called, but they're able to pull them up in their vehicles. They can pull that up in the police station. We have the ability to monitor it back at our office. We have remote ability to view those. So one of our goals obviously is that we start putting those in more places, but the infrastructure that's required is a limiting factor as well with the data needs and electricity. So I think it's one of those things that we build into future shelter projects and look at other opportunities where possible.
Yeah, so just encourage people, Alex, and those that if there are issues they can document, please have them documented. And I think we're not unsensitive to this. We just need more data before we can do anything. All right, thank you. All right.
Completely understandable.
Thank you. Let's move on to then item number 3, approval of contract for the splash pad concrete removal and replacement. Matt, you said you implied you had some information. Would have some about plumbing costs as well.
Give me a moment here. I've got want to share. So this is a little more in depth than what originally thought, and Blake is on the call to talk about this as well, but I kind of wanted to start. So we've got a number to do the concrete removal, the plumbing, and then replace the concrete back that we removed. And that's a quote of $15,201. But I also wanted to talk through some of these other things. I didn't put this on the council agenda or finance committee agenda for tomorrow evening, so we can come back and look at this at our next meeting before finance and council again. But this is kind of an evolving thing, and I wanted everybody to understand what's going on. For us to open the splash pad, we have to do item number 1. Blake, correct me if I'm wrong, but everything else is in terms of, operational maintenance and upgrade to operate more efficiently and more in line with how today's splash pads operate. So cleaning and rebuilding the manifold valves, replacing nozzles with low flow and replacing the turtle. Turtle's pretty much shot and needs to be replaced. We're waiting for a number on cleaning of the vertical features, and that is something that we could potentially do in-house, but I wanted to know the number before we made a decision there. And then I think something we've talked about previously is cleaning the entire concrete pad and then sealing with a slip reduction coating. And I'll turn it over to Blake to clarify or answer any questions that the commission has on any of this.
Yeah, so Matt, just a clarification, item 2, so the clean and rebuild the manifold. I strongly suggest you do that. Several of the features, as we went through the analysis, were not functioning properly, and we traced it back to a problem in the valves. And so at a minimum, we know we have 3, probably 4 valves that have to be replaced. And at that point, you're a third of the way through the manifold. A lot of them are dirty and corroded. It's been in effect for 12 years. It needs to be cleaned. And so I would strongly recommend at a minimum, you do item number 1 and 2. And, as I laid out in the analysis at our last meeting, we can cut, I think it was 2.5 million gallons a year by replacing those nozzles and switching out the turtle for another feature, which is that item, or the third item. So, in my mind, item 1 and 2 are mandatory. Item 3 is highly recommended. So I guess I'll leave it there.
So I know the magical question will be, and I forgot to mention this, is where is this getting paid from? There's a couple of options. the one option is from Park Development, the Lakeview Shelter budget. I'm pretty confident. Note I said pretty confident because we don't have final numbers yet, but I'm pretty confident that we're going to have room within the contingency on the Lakeview Shelter to cover $30,000 of splash pad repair should you go that direction. The other option would be operational savings this year of not operating the splash pad. And I know that's a touchier subject that is more of a finance committee issue in terms of how much they want to preserve in the operational budget to make the year balance out a little better with some of the other issues. I'm trying to show you I think there's a way to fund this in operational if that's the direction. I'm very confident that savings within the Lakeview Shelter project that we would be able to cover this as well.
Hey, Matt, can I amend my earlier comments?
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up the cleaning of the concrete. Since we're replacing several pieces of the colored concrete in the middle of the pad to replace the plumbing, if we don't do the full pad clean and anti-slip, we're gonna have a patch of really different concrete out in the middle. And so there will be a much bigger contrast, not only in the color, but also in the slip resistance, which children have less awareness of that as they move from one surface to another. You know, you and I might be able to negotiate that and anticipate that, hey, the whitish concrete is going to be slipperier than the red, but just thought I'd bring that up. So I guess what I'm telling you is do it all.
Yeah, I guess I as a parent with very little children who have watched some really nasty falls on the splash pad, I would say absolutely that has to be included.
The other thing I'd say is if you look at, this is an amenity, throw out 2020, it's been there 11 years. We've spent, to my knowledge, zero since it was installed, and granted it was installed at a heavy price tag. But in terms of upkeep and anything other than just general maintenance, we haven't spent anything at that splash pad. So to get 11 years and to be able to, correct me if I'm wrong, Blake, but this is less than 10% of the overall cost of construction.
Correct.
To kind of, I wouldn't even call this a Band-Aid. It's more of a fresh coat of paint, so to speak, to hopefully get us another 10 years of use.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, Matt. I mean, if you proceed with all these items, you're essentially going to have a brand new appearing pad and functioning pad for that matter. If anyone has, well, I assume you all looked at my photos of that manifold, but it's a mess, right? And initially, we always tell people to budget for one valve replacement a year. So here we are, as Matt said, we're 11 years in throughout 2020, and we've got 15 valves in there. So we're almost to the point where we should have been replacing a valve a year. So yeah, I think it's actually served its purpose very, very well, and it's time to give it that fresh coat of paint.
I feel a little bit like the guy who buys the golf clubs because they're on sale, even though I don't golf. But I think that given we were looking at massive costs of redoing the water system and all of this seems to be relatively small in comparison to what we look. This is one of those cases where it strikes me that we really came out on the good end and kind of lucky on this one. I'm going to personally, go with Matt that if you believe this cost can be covered, I think this is a good way to go. But we are approving a contract, which means if you're wrong in that, we're going to have to.
What I'm asking tonight, and I realize this contradicts what's on the agenda, but is to not take action tonight and bring back a final number with any direction you want to give regarding that number. If everyone thinks this is the way to go, then we'll get this buttoned up and ready for final print at the next meeting.
All right.
What's your timing to get this done? Is it Q2 of next year?
So good question, Mark. I asked Joe Daniels today if they still thought they could get the concrete done in 2020, and they felt that they could. They had anticipated in this number that they would actually cover it, and heat it if they needed to get the concrete pulled out and replaced. So, I mean, we're still pouring concrete not me, but contractors are still pouring concrete all over the place. So
So Blake, would you think it'd be best then to try and approve that 15,201 number and move forward on that and deal with the rest of this at a later time, or?
you know, that's a good way to go, Matt, because the other items are, let's see, CRS would be item 2, CRS is item 3. Clean the vertical features is either going to be an in-house thing or it's CRS. Cleaning the concrete would be Joe Daniels, but that could be added on, or, you know, as an amendment to their contract. So very good point. If you wanted to get them going in 2020, then you should approve the 15,201.
Well, and
The-
given
Blake-
that you feel confident about the money for all of this, but maybe not quite all of it, I think the 15.2 seems like a really good, safe place to go. I certainly approve of that as an idea. I would entertain a motion if somebody wants to make it.
I'll make a motion to approve the concrete removal, plumbing and concrete replacement at a cost of 15,201.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
I will second that.
All right, thank you. We have a second. Discussion, comments?
So the real issue then is the funding source. And I got to tell you, I don't think there's going to be a lot of favorable treatment to try and get this out of operating. So I think that really leaves the project plan for the shelter or other park development fees. Just as long as everybody's aware of that this is really, you know, hopefully it's covered by the Lakeview Shelter Project. But really that's the only funding source available for this year.
Yeah, I think just, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but just saying park development fund's probably the best way to go. And because anything we don't spend in the Lakeview Shelter Project just ends up back in the undesignated park development fund anyway.
Right.
Any other discussion, comments? Hearing none.
Well, I
call-
mean, well, I'm sorry. If that's the case and you can get all this work done, I think you should just do it.
Yeah, I would agree with Mark. I mean,
Right. You know, if they're still pouring concrete, it's probably better to get all this work done right now. And that way you won't have to worry about it in the springtime.
I would
I guess
agree
it was my only
with Mark.
concern.
The splash pad's been down and out for 2020. Luck has it, we can get it operational well in advance for 2021. It's one of the main draws for Lakeview Park as a community park.
So Blake, how much of this stuff will be ruined because of the weather from January through March
You
or
mean
December
the-
through March?
The stuff that you're going
Right.
to repair right now?
Yeah, I mean, are we at risk of making these repairs and then have them become weather inoperable over the winter? So what I'm getting at is it really, do we save anything by doing it now versus the spring,
Well,
other than
that's
pricing,
probably-
right?
It's probably a question better for Joe Daniels, honestly. First of all, we have to get the concrete out, and then the plumbing crew has to get in and make the repairs. And we had a little powwow on Thursday of last week about how to do that. So everyone's on the same page. It just needs to be executed. And the big question in my mind is, how long will it take to get the concrete out, make the plumbing repairs before they can come back in and re-pour? And I'm hoping that we can get all that done within 2 weeks. And well, we have a holiday in there, don't we?
Hunting season too.
I guess the question for me is just if we either want to approve this or not. And I don't think the timing is going to be the critical factor. I mean, if they can get it done in 2 weeks, that's great. If it spills into later, does that mean we don't want the project to go forward? I don't think so.
No, but I think what it does is it may change funding sources.
Okay.
Right. So the issue is that if getting it done now preserves everything and it's all preserved as new until April or May of next year, then we should just do it now. You know, I'm assuming that we're getting some type of timing discount from the construction companies because they're looking for work now as opposed to next spring.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that, Mark, and there's also the concern that I have that all this pent up demand from 20 is going to spill into the spring of 21. And when we need a crew to be on site, we may not be able to get them. So
I would,
I guess I would suggest you go ahead and approve it and you give Daniels that window and say, do it now, do it in April, don't care, just get it done.
All right, so we have a motion on the table. David, are you willing to amend your motion
Yes,
to reflect the totality?
yes.
Stu, you second that, I think?
Yes,
Are you willing to second that?
yes.
All right, so we have the amended motion to do the whole thing. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor signify by aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. Motion carried. So move forward with all due haste, please.
Matt, do you want to reach out to Joe Trainer or should I do it tomorrow?
Let me just double check one thing on the legality. If we've got a unanimous park board authorization funding from park development, does finance or council need to sign off on that? And that's my question right now.
That's fine. I'll just sit tight then and maybe do you just do a reply all to that email chain and we'll cut them loose if that's the way to go.
All
Will
right,
do.
well, you guys can work that out. So having no additional agenda items, any new business, entertain a motion to adjourn? Nobody wants to?
Moved.
So moved. Thank you. A second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you all. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Good night.
Night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.